So good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody, wherever you are. I'm in Shanghai. It's now 9 p.m. So this is the last thing I'll be doing today except checking some emails. And I'm really excited that you guys take the time to talk to me. Thank you very much. Yeah. My name is David Hartman. I am a intrapreneur and entrepreneur. I've done both in my career, working in large corporates and building new businesses within corporates, but also building businesses outside of corporates. Yeah. I spent 16 years in the chemical industry, and at the moment I have just founded a new company focused on 3D printing software. The company's name is Helio Additive, and at Helio Additive we are really excited that we believe we have a core technology for the material extrusion-based 3D printing market that can dramatically change the evolution of that industry. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. Why should you spend an hour listening to me talk about entrepreneurship? I guess there's no particularly special reason, but I think I've got a fairly broad international experience when it comes to entrepreneurship. So I've seen entrepreneurship in Europe, in Asia, I've participated in it. And what I wanted to do today with you guys was give you some thoughts, both integrating the sustainability perspective, but also maybe put in some thoughts that you don't see that often when you read case studies or textbooks on entrepreneurship. You can agree or disagree with anything I say here, of course, and I'm particularly interested in thoughtful disagreement, and I'm looking forward to interaction questions that make me think. I'm quite excited for that. So let me jump into it. I've got some notes here, and I'm not going to show any slides. I've just got 4 or 5 different points that I wanted to explore with you guys during this session. Is that okay with everybody? I can see a few faces. I hope that's fine. I hope you can hear me all right. So the first thing I wanted to talk about a little bit is uniqueness. Yeah. And, you know, I think we read a whole lot of books, or we have the opportunity to read a whole lot of books, watch a whole lot of YouTube videos about entrepreneurship. What does it take to go from an idea to a successful business, right? And there's tons of gurus out there. Then you can go through biographies and read about people who, wow, they've done a lot of great stuff in their lives and they've built these businesses, and that's all fine. But what strikes me really is how random and unique most people's journeys are when they're entrepreneurs. I've always had a lot of trouble raising money, and I always feel like a real idiot because I think, well, David, you must be doing something wrong that you have so much difficulty fundraising, and I'm happy we've just closed a round, so I can say that quite happily. But then, you know, you run across other people and they're like, oh, I made 2 phone calls and my seed round was closed. And you go, well, good for you, you know, that's not my experience, right? Or you hear people who have really, in a pretty standard way, applied something like the business model canvas, and they've done really well out of it. And then you see people who use idea generation as part of the corporate world, and you get 60 ideas, and quite frankly, it's very hard to imagine any of them succeeding. I think that could lead us down the path of being fairly depressed about all these kind of recipes for entrepreneurship. But I think on the contrary, I think it's very, very positive and exciting, because it means that that when we choose to participate in entrepreneurship, we're almost guaranteed that our journey will be totally unique. And in my opinion, that has a lot of charm. It does mean that there's no guarantees of success or no ways where you can say, if I do this and then I do that, I'll be guaranteed this outcome. But it does mean that you'll be faced with a whole lot of surprises along the way. And at the end of the day, if everything was already predictable, then why would we be doing it, right? And yet, having said that, I think there are patterns that we can observe. And the more sensitive we are to those patterns, maybe the better we can predict a little bit and say, okay, we don't know exactly how this is going to play out, but we do know that regularly these are the kind of challenges that occur at this stage. And then you can start thinking about, okay, how do I work on those challenges? How do I map them out? How do I deal with those things? That for me, yes. Does anybody have a question or a point? No? Okay, I just heard some microphone activity. That for me is kind of uniqueness in a nutshell, and I've been thinking about that a lot because I've been talking to, we're at the moment part of a technology park outside of Shanghai. It's in a city about an hour outside of Shanghai, and I get to meet the entrepreneurs who have their offices kind of on the same floor or next floors to mine. And they are all super, or most of them that I've met are super intelligent people, PhDs from Cornell, amazing technical pedigrees, right? Some of them great communicators, others where you go, oh my God, I didn't understand a word of this pitch, right? And yet everybody's finding their path in their own way. You talk to their teams, you know, some people are like our team where we have a pretty, I think a pretty cool office and where people are very passionate. You go into other people's spaces and it's a cubicle farm and it feels like everybody's pretty much working, doing their 9 to 5. And it just shows how all of these ways are somehow successful or can move forward, right? There's no one of these entrepreneurs or offices where I go, that person has an edge. They all have something interesting and it's their uniqueness that makes them interesting. I guess what does that mean practically for us? I think it means two things. One, when we embark on entrepreneurial journeys and we feel like everybody else is doing better than us or everybody else is doing something that we're not, we shouldn't be discouraged because most likely everybody is feeling the same way if we agree that their journeys are unique as well, right? And I think that's very powerful because failure is often really a function of just giving up, right? When we fail in entrepreneurial journeys, it's often because we just choose to not continue or choose to not participate anymore. And if we somehow can be convinced that everybody else is facing unique challenges, we're facing unique challenges, all we have to do is just keep putting one foot in front of the other and we will get somewhere. I think that's a very heartening thought. And then the other aspect that I think we can do is just keep our eyes open with curiosity and just really enjoy the fact that nobody knows what's coming next. So that covers what I wanted to talk about in terms of uniqueness. And that kind of leads me, you know, I mentioned these two different types of offices. One office where everybody is clearly you know, like Benjamin Zander says, if you've seen Benjamin Zander's TED Talk, he talks about shining eyes, right? And you go into some offices and you just see these shining eyes, and then you go into other offices and it's a cubicle farm. I slept in the office the last 2 nights and I was very pleased to find out that my neighbor also sometimes sleeps in the office, which was quite funny. But so let's talk a bit about vision and mission-based entrepreneurship. And I think this is often connected to sustainability because I think a lot of the people in my circle, and I assume a lot of the people in your circle, are really convinced that A, science has shown that climate change exists, and B, if we don't actively do something about it, we're in quite a lot of trouble. Yeah. And I think the temptation is there then, when we talk about this vision mission, is to get very evangelical and preachy, right? For myself, our vision mission at Helio is we really want to help grow 3D printing because we believe it's a key technology to make communities independent. And whether you're a 7,000 person community in the Andes or you're a coastal city in India, independence is a powerful tool to help you survive in the future, right? And I'm often tempted when I discuss with my co-founder, he's very curiosity and science focused. So for him, he finds my kind of naive preachiness a little bit, let's say, funny. Because for him, he's really just focused on, these are technical challenges. There are people who need these technical challenges. These technical challenges are cool, and we're going to do them, right? And why is David going on about communities being independent? What is with that, right? And it's taken me a while personally to stop taking that personally and to kind of just smile about that and say, yes, sometimes, we may have a vision, but that doesn't mean we should take it too serious. And when I wrote this down, I wrote kind of 3 key words that maybe you guys could write down and that could stay with you guys. One is fanaticism. I think when we believe something very strongly, we're tempted to dive into fanaticism. And personally, I've thought about it a lot. I do not see any cases where fanaticism is a good thing. And when vision mission drives us into that direction, yeah, it's dangerous. The second one is gentleness. I think the people that I like the most, also in the sustainability world, whether it's now one of my best friends in sustainability is a guy called Patrick Sandin, also listening to John Elkington talk, I'm always impressed by how gentle they are, right? They believe in something, but there's a gentleness involved there. And I think somehow that makes vision mission more powerful when it's combined with gentleness. And then the third one, and you could argue that it's linked to gentleness, is really empathy, right? When we believe something very strongly, or how do we put ourselves in other people's shoes and kind of understand when we're taking ourselves too seriously, or when we're being evangelical about something, or when we're stepping into their area. Yeah. When are we talking to when are we disappointed in our employees because they're not fully on board with the vision? And where are we lacking in empathy when we feel disappointed about that? So, of course, we need, of course, we can make a choice to believe in something and therefore drive a business because we believe in something, right? Of course, we can do that. But I think when we do that, we have a lot of responsibility, and we have the responsibility to have respect for other people in how we then turn that around day to day. Yeah. So that covers uniqueness and a few words on vision mission. And the next thing I really want to talk about was growth. I had a startup about 6 years ago, and we were very, very lucky to win a place in a pretty high profile pharma incubator in Berlin. And the people running the incubator was awesome. It was an amazing opportunity. We were all really, really excited. And I remember being steered in a direction of you must grow. And when I experienced that 7 years ago, it kind of triggered a whole lot of memories of times when I'd seen that in the corporate world. I used to do global merger and acquisitions and global strategic planning for one of the largest chemical companies in the world. And of course, at the end, strategy is about making choices, right? Where you allocate resources and where you pull resources out of. And the main driver usually is growth. And when you start to talk to people about, okay, so if we for some reason couldn't talk about growth, what would we talk about strategically? And all of a sudden there's usually silence, because it's very, very difficult to talk about strategy or to talk about a business plan or talk about a business model when you remove growth as an equation. Yeah? If you're a Y Combinator startup, the graph that you have to show is your exponential growth. If you effectively, if you are showing investors something, you want to show them, hey, you're putting money in, and in the future that money is going to be worth a whole lot more because we're going to grow, right? But if you're not allowed to talk about growth, and it is an old metric, what can we talk about? I don't have any answer to that question. I guess my hope is really that more people start asking that question, and I see a lot of this kind of talk happening around the sustainability community, around the circularity community, people like the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and other people, because they realize that we're in a closed loop system where, growth forever until the end of time just is self-defeating and doesn't really make sense. Maybe some places where there's interesting perspectives on growth. If you've read Kim Stanley Robinson's Red Mars, Green Mars, Blue Mars trilogy, he talks about full world economics, and alternatives to growth is part of full world economics. And even though he circles it, he never comes out and he says, this is what it is. But I think there are some very, very interesting ideas there, things that are very well worth exploring. And if any of you guys have any ideas of alternative metrics to growth, in particular for startups, please message me. I'm really interested in that discussion. So we've covered a little bit about uniqueness. We've covered a little bit about vision, mission. We've covered about finding a replacement for growth. And I have two topics left. I kind of see maybe another 15 minutes, and then we can do some Q&A if that's okay, and some discussion. So the first topic is people and diversity. We're hiring a technical team at the moment, and I've been recruiting maybe 2 people a week over the last weeks, and doing a lot of interviews as part of that, and trying to keep our team balanced from a gender perspective. And a lot of the people that I work with are asking, you desperately need to fill this position. You need somebody with talents in that area. Why would you obsess so much about gender balance? In March this year, I was just before the coronavirus crisis hit. I was in the mountains in Peru, outside of Cusco, and part of visiting a community of about 7,000 people in the Andes. And they're ruled by 2 councils, a council of men and a council of women. And there can never be an imbalance. So there are always an equal number of leaders from both genders. And we were discussing a little bit in the evening there, what is the implication of that? What does that mean? How does that work? And why can you never have an imbalance? And for me, that evening really clicked something in my head where I came back and then went into a diversity discussion within the corporate world and listened to certain arguments which all of a sudden didn't make too much sense anymore. One, we don't get any candidates, any female candidates for whatever technical jobs. I said, okay, well, maybe you wrote the job description wrong. 2, why should the pendulum swing so far in the other direction? I said, well, you weren't complaining when the pendulum was over on the other side years ago, right? So I think even in small teams, especially in small teams, when we're starting early on, we need to make that extra effort when it comes to having a gender balance, because it's so tempting to say, we have our burn rate, we know how many months we can survive. We're against the clock technically. Things are urgent. Yes, gender balance is important, but why would you sacrifice urgent things for something that's maybe not so urgent? And I think the argument we have to make is exactly the opposite. If not when we're starting out and we're small, then when will we do this, right? And when will we be able to reap the benefits of having a diverse and balanced team, in particularly gender balance, but of course there are a whole lot of facets to diversity. And that leads us to inclusion, right? Where how can we be radically inclusive right at the beginning instead of, then 2 years later when you have several hundred people starting to talk about radical inclusion and those kind of factors. Yeah, a challenging one, and I guess coming from a privileged position of male, technically educated European, and going into the workforce 20 years ago, I guess I never really saw or never had so much evidence of imbalance. I was blind to the evidence of imbalance, and now seeing it a little bit more makes me think, how can we address it in places where it's still very, very difficult? And that kind of leads me to the last point that I wanted to say. I'm part of leadership group that's called Pathfinder. There is a Scandinavian leadership organization. They run a 3-module leadership program, which is fairly unique. They also have a master class, and that was why I was in Peru in March. And during in the last module, I don't want to talk about the contents because we're not meant to talk about it. It kind of ruins it for other people. But one of the book topics that came up is a little book called Finite and Infinite Games. And it's by a guy called James P. Carse. I think he still is alive, but he wrote this book in the 80s. He's a professor at a university in New York, I think, and he's a philosopher. But he talks, I really never understood it until I'd finished module 3 of that leadership course. But he talks about there being, can you guys still hear me? Somehow I've lost background noise. Yes, can?
Yes,
okay.
Yes, we can.
He talks about, very good, thank you. He talks about 2 kinds of games. So one game is the finite game, and the finite game is characterized by winners and losers. It's characterized by finite resources, where if I have power, you don't have it. Yeah. For me to get more power, I have to take it away from other people. And I think most of us who work have encountered this kind of game and have played this kind of game. Yeah, I was in the corporate world for 16 years. The corporate world is exactly a finite game. You compete for the next hierarchy step, right? If you want to be a little bit cynical about it, right? And you compete against other people. So by making the next step, you take something away from somebody else. But James P. Carse says that actually there is a wider game that we can play, and it's the infinite game. And it's a game where it's not so much, it's not about winning or losing. In fact, we're very neutral about winning or losing. The key thing is to live with the surprise. For the finite game player, surprise is a bad thing, because if I don't know what's going to happen, if I'm uncertain about what's going to happen, then I can lose something that I have, or maybe not gain something that I want, right? So a finite game tries to reduce movement on the game board, but an infinite player tries to be surprised constantly, right? And brings a curiosity and excitement and a childlike joy to whatever game they're playing. Yeah, this is of course very disturbing to finite players, because they can't predict, or infinite players are very random for finite players, right? Because they're not agreeing to play by the same rules. They're motivated by different goals. But I would argue that in this idea of an infinite game is really the perfect way to play entrepreneurship, to enjoy playing that game of entrepreneurship. Statistically, the probability of success is very, very low. You're much better off going and finding a 9-to-5 job somewhere. But that is not the reason to do it. The reason to do it is the incredibly exciting people you get to meet, the challenging problems you get to solve, the opportunities to grow personally, the opportunities to feel joy and surprise in different ways that you would not have experienced otherwise. And that's the last thought I wanted to leave you guys with before we have a little bit of discussion, is really thinking about your own lives and your own roles in the organizations that you work in, whether it's your organization or an organization founded by somebody else. To what extent can you afford to step out of the finite game approach and instead say, hey, I'm playing for different reasons here. Thank you very much, guys. And with that, I really hope we can start some discussion for the next 25 minutes.
Hi.
Hey, Maria.
Hi. I think there's a little bit of delay, so I will speak slowly. And if anyone else wants to speak, just sign or something, so I will know. I'd like to thank you for your presentation. I think you presented pretty cool key points. And this last one, the finite versus the infinite games, I think it's the one that caught my attention, along with the discussion about growth. I think the main point right now is that it's very difficult to communicate other types of growth. When you are contributing socially or environmentally, there's not like a unique language that everybody's speaking, because if I can translate growth into dollars or into euros, everybody will understand, everybody's speaking the same language. It's very hard to communicate. Even if you say, okay, so I saved or I avoided the emission of 2 tons of CO2, for example, that doesn't mean anything to a lot of people. So I think the problem here for the shift to happen, it's more of how we can communicate other types of results rather than who is doing it. Because I think there's a lot of people making the shift already, which is very positive, but it's very difficult to communicate this. And when you were talking, I wrote the donut framework. It's not easy to communicate verbally and talking, but I think the donut framework has been providing a visual manner of sharing this contribution to very different dimensions, which are not only economic growth.
Thank you very much for sharing that.
Thank you.
On that growth conversation, Maria, I think, like you say, it's a totally, we need a new language for talking about those kind of things, right? And right now, so many parts of thinking about strategy or business models are implicit assumptions that we make about how the world works, right? And they're so, it's like Hollywood movies. We've seen them from when we were kids. And so all these story tropes of Hollywood movies are in our heads implicitly, right? The hero myth. We've seen that movie a million times. So of course we know it and we live it. And kind of going away from growth is going away from the hero myth that we've been kind of absorbed in our whole lives, right? Would anybody else like to raise a point or comment or challenge or question?
May I ask something?
Yeah, sure.
It's how when you are trying to promote your business or your idea for funding, for example, you have to, or usually give this perspective of growth. How do you incorporate, for example, gender balance in the plan, and how do you sell that has a positive target?
From my side, if we're talking to investors or so on, but I don't really talk about things like diversity and gender balance. For me, I hope that they're just that as we grow, they're implicit. Right now, I do most of our hiring, so I can directly control how we're balancing gender and making sure that when we have when we see 10 CVs for a position, that we're seeing a balance of genders in those candidates, right? So I can still control that. As we grow, of course, that will be more and more difficult. But I don't make a big fuss out of it, but our team knows that that is a priority, and they also, it's totally okay to question it, and we have discussions around it. I think some of them just say, oh, it's an idiosyncrasy. Some of them totally believe in it. But towards investors or customers, okay, cool. Well, it would be really exciting to hear some of the entrepreneurial stories here. If you have any, I would suggest if you have any questions or any messages, you can find me on LinkedIn and just direct message. I'm very happy to talk to anybody who's interested. Yeah.